I thought you were at the football, Tim.
Oh, it's such a joy for me.
Are we there, Hannah?
Yep, we're now live.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Just a few notes from me before we get underway. Jamie Beardsmore, who normally clerks for us, is on leave, so we've got Hannah clerking for us this afternoon. At the beginning of the meeting, I need to mention that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed. It's being conducted in accordance with the council's remote meeting. Just to confirm, the recording is in progress. So in accordance with the council's remote meetings protocol, proceedings and rules. Sorry, guys, there's some microphones on. And now my phone's going. Good start. Please, can I ask you to indicate by raising your hand if you'd like to add anything to the discussion? Can I remind you to mute microphones? It's our preference that cameras are on, but if this causes you to have a breakup of sound or picture, we're happy for you to turn them off. And just to advise you that voting is by general assent. Before we go on to the main agenda, I just need to make you aware that officers had intended to give us an update on the safety valve during this evening's meeting, but we're unable to do this due to the general election, and that is because during a pre-election period we're unable to host any conversations on controversial political subjects, and so therefore we will have a full update on the safety valve in the September meeting. So those are just the points to note before we start. If we go to item number 1, please. Apologies for absence or any substitute members. Hannah, can you confirm if we've got any apologies?
I have apologies from Keith Granger, Sue Butler, and Trudy Salmons.
Thank you very much. And I understand a couple of members are not able to stay beyond certain times. If you can just put in the chat for us if you're leaving early, so we can pick that up. It is quite important this afternoon because we're very close to being core, so we will need to keep an eye on arrivals and departures. Just moving on to declarations of interest, we have quite a few this afternoon, so I'm going to read through the ones that I am aware of, but of course people can declare interest at any point if it becomes evident during the discussion that you're affected. Sorry, Grant, your hand is up.
No, I just need to make, I didn't send this in advance, so can I declare an interest on item 4, particularly around the information about tuition service, as my daughter is supported by that service?
Excellent. Yes, thank you very much. We'll note that. The other declarations that we've had in advance is for Trudy under agenda item 6. But I don't think Trudy is with us, so we just need to be aware of that if she joins. And then for agenda item 7, recommendation 3.2, my school has got an interest. Liz Savage, Caroline Johnson, and Katie Moore were also affected by that, so just be aware of that. I'm not intending to ask anybody to withdraw, but just that we've got clear declarations of interest. Are there any other declarations that we've missed? Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. If we go to item 3, which is minutes and matters arising, I've checked the minutes through. Is everybody happy to record them as an accurate record? Lovely. Thank you very much. And there are no actions or matters arising from that section, unless anybody spotted something that we haven't. Good. On to number 4. This is funding arrangements for pupils not attending school as a result of permanent exclusions or medical reasons. We're on page 7 of the pack. And Dwayne, I think I'm coming to you for the presentation.
Yes, you are. Thank you, Chair. So this paper is about recouping money from schools. So the funding follows the child when the child has been permanently excluded. That isn't, that's to note. We should have been recouping the money all along, and I know as a council we haven't. So the DFE guidance says that we can do this. So I'd like the schools forum to note around that. The other sort of part of the paper is to agree an approach really around the recruitment for medical needs. So in terms of, if I start with the permanently exclusions, when children are permanently excluded, as colleagues here may know, that the local authority has a duty to put in education. So far, schools have been retaining the money, but what we aim to do is recoup that money now, so the funding follows the child, and that will pay towards the education for that child. So in terms of the medical needs, I mean, there are many children. There's approximately 49 children accessing that service. Some children in that service have accessed that service for many, many years. So part of this paper is to look at recouping money to actually follow the child into the medical needs service as well. So one is to obviously note, which is the permanent exclusion. So we just want you to note that. The second is obviously for you to agree an approach really around the funding around medical needs. So back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Dwayne. I've got a couple of comments, but if anybody else has got anything to say, please pop your hand up. The secondary heads had a bit of a discussion about this last week, and there was no objection to the permanent exclusion clawback. That seems to be sensible, that if the student is leaving you, that the money should follow them. There were some concerns raised around the clawback for medical, and the rate of the clawback being 100%, and the concerns are around where somebody is going into medical tuition. Schools still maintain responsibility around attendance, quality of education, and safeguarding. And there's also an intention that the medical provision should be short-term and reintegration. And that means that schools are still going to incur costs. And so we have asked if there can be reconsideration, perhaps that schools maintain the ORPU, and then the top-up funding or pupil premium is used to support the home tuition. But that just so if we can ask for some further discussion around that rather than agree on anything today.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I'm happy to work with heads around that. And I think it is important for the child, you know, to keep that contact with the school as well. Unfortunately, for some children, they have been there for a long time and not necessarily had that contact. So how do you want to move this forward? I'm happy to have more discussions around the tuition service.
Is there a meeting coming up with heads? Could it be raised again, or to what extent are you able to adjust this? Is this something that has to happen financially, or is there room to make an adjustment?
I think it would be good to discuss with heads, to be honest with you, because I think if the child has pupil premium, then that pupil premium should follow the child. So that's one aspect. If the child's having element 3 funding, that should follow the child as well. So, you know, I'm happy to set up a meeting come September for us to go through the tuition service, which is separate from then obviously the exclusions, Stuart, with heads and head reps. Okay, we've got
a hand up, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So first of all, can I say I think the principle of money following the child, 100% agree. Very good. Again, I just want to remind people of my declaration of interest.
Yeah.
I so I want to first of all praise the tuition service. I think they do a really, really good job. I not just from my own personal perspective, but I've heard others say what a good job they do in lots of different contexts, and I think that's really important to note. I just wanted to pick out 2 things that I think interesting, and I guess a slight challenge for me in one. So I think the overrepresentation of young people with autism, you know, that's really significant, isn't it? That the number of children and young people being supported in tuition with ASD. And I think that's because of the comorbidity ASD has with mental health services.
Yeah.
And in 5.17, I think you make a really, really good point about that question that needs to be asked about, that non-attendance that then leads to tuition. But for me, that question, we need to ask that question, and we need to actually look at this really holistically, and actually the whole is mental health. It is not my daughter's autism that is her barrier to going to school. It is her mental health. It's the anxiety. It's the comorbidity that is the barrier. And there are no services, no support, no nothing that people can access. And I feel that if we were asking that question and thinking about how do we get that mental health support into schools much earlier, in whatever form, we would take a lot of pressure off of our tuition service. And I think the other question we need to ask is, are our schools, and again, this is not a criticism of my daughter's school, because I think they do an amazing job and have been incredibly supportive, but are our schools as autism friendly and mental health friendly as they need to be? And I think that question, Dwayne, is absolutely hitting the nail on the head. And my challenge to you, the local authority, is, and I'd love to be part of this if I can, is what can we do then to ask that question and come up with some solutions about getting our young people back into school in some way? And maybe that's part tuition, part school, or hybrid. But I just feel that is the solution. It needs to be a holistic approach, and it isn't just about tuition and on its own. It is about that, and I think that point out. So I just wanted to say that, and to offer help as both an educator that sees our young people go to secondary school and then don't quite do as well as they do in primary because of the different way that we do things, and also because of my own personal vested interest. But I just wanted to share that and to say thank you to the tuition service for the work they do.
Thank you. Can I come back on that, just for colleagues to be aware as school leaders? I met with the mental health in schools team last week. There is £1,000 grant that comes out to all schools, so you can apply for the grant to have a sort of mental health in schools team specialist in your school. When I looked at the data, very few schools, there's only about 10 schools have applied for that grant, but it is there, it's there for the taking. And having a mental health representative on your school team as well, and they will come into school and support. And obviously they have a capacity to escalate where needs be into the CAMHS service. But absolutely, Grant, I'd be more than happy to work with you. It'd be great to be part of the team.
So I think there's a few bits and pieces here just to acknowledge our thanks to the tuition service. I'm also wondering, Dwayne, sorry, under the Delivering Better Value scheme, isn't there a project starting this year about transition from year 6 to 7, particularly for pupils with ASD, to try and smooth some of that anxiety? I know it won't have had an impact yet, but that is taking place.
Yes, so we've got all the team in place now, so that just for colleagues to be aware, the DBV is now the safety valve.
Okay.
So it's been superseded by the safety valve. So yes, we've appointed a team of staff that are working with our children in primary. They have a sort of a caseload of children each now, and are working with the families as well in terms of transition. So hopefully when I look at previous sort of dropout rates, hopefully we won't see that now with the support that's been available through the local authority. And I think Stuart and colleagues, we could do more to share what's happening there as well with heads, because that is a good project, and we're having good outcomes really from the families, the feedback. So yes, that's in place.
Okay, thank you very much. Liz.
It was just to say how wonderful the project is and how well it's going from my perspective as head teacher. I've had 7 workers come in, and it's been the strongest transition that we've had in Jennetts Park for the time I've been here, but also in other local authorities. Really, really well organised, but also putting the parents and the children's mind at ease about what the next life is about. They're very, very, very helpful.
Thank you very much for that. I think it's worth noting that whilst the recommendations today are about how bits and pieces are financed, we should quite rightly acknowledge Grant's point that it's about getting underneath the reasons why we've got that growth and seeing what we can do to reduce the incidents in the first place. If there are no other comments, can I go to the recommendations? I can't see any hands. So if we page 7, we've got 2 recommendations, and these are to note. I think we've got agreement around 2.1 to note the intention to implement the DfE funding policy regarding permanent exclusions. Are we all happy to note that? Thank you. And then 2.2, I don't think we can agree to the approach to recoupment, but can I suggest that, as you said, Dwayne, there's a meeting in September and a discussion with head teachers, perhaps around that, can recognise the school maintaining some role and therefore some holding on to some of that money.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll have an action for a meeting to take place in September.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Item 5, the provisional outturn schools budget. I think this is you, Paul.
Yes, thank you very much, Stuart. Yeah, I mean, the next 3 papers are all finance related, and they're all connected to the 23-24 financial accounts in general. So they're basically reporting on things that have happened, just so you're aware how things have occurred compared to the budget and the decisions and the expectations when these decisions were taken as part of the budget setting process. So each of them are also annual reports, so you've seen them in this sort of format for a number of years now. So I will hopefully just go through each of these reports, obviously one at a time. I'll just pick out 1 or 2 bits for a minute, but assuming you've had a chance to have a look at the detail in there, which says in a consistent format, and hopefully it makes that familiar for those of you that have been on the forum for a while now. So as Stuart said, yeah, the first one is about looking at the final spend in the 23-24 accounts of the school's budget. So we're actually reporting what the spend was, and also whether any of the balances have been used to support that expenditure, or money's been moved into the balances as well. So it brings you up to date on all the financing side of it as well. As I said, just a few bits to pull out then. As expected, and as we were expecting at the start of the year, the school's budget has overspent significantly again in 23-24. And again, that's linked to the Harness Block budget we talked about numerous times, and that's connected to the work we're doing now with the safety valve. So the 23-24 accounts did actually overspend by £8.827 million. And within that, there was an underspending on the school's budget in the early years block parts of that. It's the Harness Block budget overspent by £9.27 £4 million. And there's a high level summary of the accounts, Annex A, which is at pages 25, 26, if you want to see a bit more detail of the spread of those variances across the main budget areas. Also want to highlight that obviously there's a large debt that is now accruing in the school's budget, as I say again, around the Harness Block budget, and there's a table on page 22 that just shows you how those reserves are changing, and you can see at the very bottom line in the far right hand corner the deficit balance that we are now rolling forward into 24-25 amounts to £18.062 million. You can see that's gone up £2.5 million during the course of the year, and the reason why that's slightly different from the headline figures is, if you can see in that second block of figures on page 20, the very last line shows the safety valve income, and you can see during 23-24 we received our first instalment of the safety valve income, and that was £6.4 million. So obviously that's gone into that account, and that'll be part of the financing of the medium-term plan that we'll put in place connected with the safety valve. So that would have been a higher figure if we hadn't got that income. And also a reminder that is a deficit. So obviously that's money that we don't have, that we overspent. And at the moment, the DfE have a temporary they've got a temporary exception on local authorities going into deficits with their schools' budgets, but that's due to end at March 2026, in which case that money will fall onto the plan is at the moment that money would fall onto a local authority's balance sheet, and obviously needs to be taken into account in local authorities' finances. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on going forward as well. I don't know if everyone else heard that, but the recording stopped. But anyway, so they're the main things I wanted to highlight. I don't think there's anything else to say on that paper. So there's a fair bit of information on there. There's some information around where the variances have occurred in the account. So happy to take any questions, but I think that pulls out the key parts that I wanted to highlight.
Thanks, Paul. I think we lost Hannah for a second there. Are you back with us, Hannah?
Yes, I'm back in. My internet is a bit dodgy, but I'm back in.
I think we did get a message that the recording has stopped as well. So I don't know if you need to restart anything.
It's still going through Zoom, so that's fine. it's still being picked up for YouTube.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Again, if there's any comments, please raise a hand. I've just got a couple, Paul, to make sure we've understood it correctly. So excluding the safety valve money, it looks like the budget was, that the outcome was worse than budget, but was better than we thought it was going to be when we looked at this in December.
Exactly, yeah. So we were looking at the start of the year £7.166 million overspend. When we looked at our latest forecast at the start of the calendar year 24, it looked like it might be about over £10 million overspend. But going through more work and some further reconciliations, it's come down to the £8.827 million. So yes, it's lower than our worst projection, but it's higher than we were expecting at the start of the financial year.
And I know we can't discuss anything in detail about safety valve, but these numbers are broadly in line with our commitments to safety valve. We're not seeing a deterioration from those numbers.
No, it's £300,000 higher than we thought when we set our safety valve bid. So it's in the scheme of the multi-year program. Obviously, it's a fairly large figure, but it's not something that we wouldn't expect to be able to manage through further actions during the course of that 5-6 year period.
Okay, so obviously not great, but
no, exactly,
deterioration from agreements that we've previously made. Okay, thank you, Liz.
So my comment, because I went and looked back at previous years where we'd had underspend in staff absences. Am I right? Are there fewer staff absences?
I mean, it's one of those. The staff absences is mainly staff on maternity leave.
Okay.
So it's not people long-term sick or something like that. It just covers. The staff suspensions are included in that. That's a very small budget. There was no staff suspensions that were funded last year. The vast majority of it is maternity leave absences, and obviously that goes up and down.
And in previous years, that has been something that we've commented on about how the turnover of staff has been detrimental to the efficient running. So well done the people who've been here and staying and making it easier.
Thank you, Liz. I think just another number to pick out there is that I think we've always had concerns about how much we spend out of borough, particularly with the non-maintained specials, and that is a line which is significantly overspent again. But I guess that's being addressed through all the work about bringing places back into borough.
Yeah, that's obviously one of our key objectives in this year.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other comments? In that case, can we go to page 17? And we are looking at Schools Forum notes, and we are noting 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. All duly noted. Okay, thank you very much. Back to you, Paul.
Okay, yeah, again, so number 6 is looking at the balances held by maintained schools. Obviously not academies, this is just maintained schools because they're still part of the local authority statutory accounts. So there's a fair bit of information in there again. I don't think I really need to go through anything in particular, but there's a highlight of key changes on page 31, and there's just 3 of those items I'd just like to highlight. I'm sure you've noticed that, and I don't think it's going to be too much of a surprise to anyone that in aggregate balances did come down last financial year. So they came down by £712,000, which is a 35% reduction on the level of balances held in the previous financial year. So that obviously indicates that schools are having to withdraw money to balance their spend in the year. And obviously that's out of one-off money as well. So that's continuing a recent trend of money coming out of the reserves rather than building those reserves up. The other one is number 3 on 6.3 in the on average schools have a surplus balance of 2.7%, and that was 4.5% last year. And what we've generally said is that if above 3%, around 3% should be a safe level to manage any in-year unforeseen circumstances. Obviously, that's an average, so some schools will have lower than that, some are in deficit, but we're below that level now, so we're just below that level. So that's something we obviously have been doing for a number of years now, to keep an eye on that and see how that goes. So that's just moving obviously lower and lower. And then the final one is just at number 9. There are some deficit balances in the figures you can see in the annexes, and as per usual, we're going through meeting all the schools that have a deficit or have contacted us to say that they are needing some support balancing their 24-25 budget, and we're in the process of going through those now, and I would expect to bring back a report hopefully in September, but it depends how quickly we can progress those discussions with the individual schools. It may be a little bit after that, but yeah, we're going through that process now. So I think that's all I'd really like to highlight on that paper as well.
Okay, I don't want to bore people with my comments. First of all, does anybody else want to pass any comment or ask any questions? In that case, I know we're not supposed to be political, but we do have Councillor Bailey in the room, and I think, Paul, you've pointed out the bits that I wanted to point out, that schools are under significant pressure, and that is demonstrated by the fact that balances are falling, and that on average to sort of dip below the target level of 3% is a concern, and it shows the pressure that schools are under, and I think it would be remiss of us not to make some sort of comment about the concerns, because if balances continue to deteriorate at that rate, we're going to have more and more schools in deficit, and I think there are a significant number of schools out there that are struggling to balance budgets and meet the needs of students. So it is a very difficult set of circumstances that schools are in at the moment. The other thing to note is on the significant surpluses. I don't think we as members have had a chance to look at any of the detail behind those, but just to check that the officers are happy that those are genuine and being used for the correct purposes, if we're being asked to agree that they're not subject to clawback.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that in the introduction. Yeah, so there are 3 schools with a significant surplus balance. There is a little bit of information on that in the annexes about what that money is being held for. Okay. So there are plans in place, and head teachers have confirmed that's what they intend to do with it. Recent experiences that head teachers, the spend does follow what the head teachers are indicating. Obviously, there can be instances when it doesn't do, but it is generally a good measure that the information we get back does follow through into the next set of accounts. So yeah, we've done some checking with them, and that they look reasonable, the explanations that are being given to us.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on that item? Okay.
It's Roy Bailey. I can't see how to operate the hand gesture on this one.
Okay, so no worries.
I just want you to know that I hear everything you're saying on that. And that I have been in touch with the Shadow Education Secretary and the various ministers, and I can assure you they're very, very aware of everything you're saying. That's not to promise anything, because it's not going to happen like that. We've yet to win the election, but should we win the election, I absolutely promise from Bracknell we'll be firing as much as we can at them to get them to do something about the troubles and challenges you currently have.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, as we've got to be careful about being political, I think we would welcome the support of councillors with whichever government is elected to press for school funding based on the evidence that we've got in Bracknell about the tightening school finances, before I get in any trouble with Paul. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, can we go to page 30? So the forum 3.1 is to note the key financial information that Paul's just been through and that's in the paper. So can we agree to note 3.1 and the 5 subsections? Good. I'm seeing nods and no objections, so that is noted. This forum then has to agree to item 3.2, and that is the entire significant surplus balances, and that they should not be clawed back at all. Are we all happy to agree that? Oh, sorry, there's a hand up here. Grant.
I just wanted to clarify whether, as an academy representative, given this it's not relevant to academies, whether we get to vote or whether we should remain quiet.
I'll have to defer to Paul. I've got no note that this is that we're dividing the vote here.
There's no restricted voting on this. Anyone who's a member can vote on this paper.
Okay. Thank you, Grant and Paul. So in that case, are we all happy to agree? Good, no objection. So 3.2 is agreed. I'm afraid, Paul, we're coming back to you. Item 7, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. So so this is the final finance paper relating mainly to 23-24, but this one does have a few areas of importance for 24-25. So say another annual report. So this sets out the use of the funds that are held centrally by the council at the start of the budget year, because we don't have any certainty about where the money should be allocated, because it's usually attached to policies that we need to get some data that identifies those schools that are eligible, that meet the criteria we've set to allocate the money. So that this paper then sets out how all those different funds have been used. Most of them will come out of the schools budget. There's one out of the high needs block budget. Some relate just to maintained schools, some relate to all schools, but this is just mainstream schools, so it's not special schools or approved. So this paper shows that last year there was £561 million budget. Funded allocation, so there was an underspending of £168,000, and one of the main reasons why this funding is held centrally is because there are volatile and unpredictable calls on these funds, and that's why it's held centrally rather than giving all schools a small amount, because it needs to be targeted to the schools that actually face the challenges that arise from these particular policies. So each of the details of that expenditure is set out in the main paper. The only thing I really want to highlight is in terms of some of the policies that we're proposing to update, and this is for update for 24-25, but obviously this is an appropriate time to do those policy changes. So nothing's going to change from 23-24 because those policies have already been agreed, but there are three changes, and it's paragraph 3.2 is the recommendation about agreeing those policy texts. So it's the first three there. So there's an updated policy text for the growth fund for next year. That is where we previously funded schools for increasing pupil numbers when they cross a funding threshold. What we're proposing now is just to fund schools when we agreed they need a new class, rather than just a piecemeal. You've gone over a number of pupils, here's some money for you. And this was, and draft text was presented to the school forum in December, and that was reported then, and we've just repeated that again now, so there's no change to that particular text at this stage. Same again for the second one, the removal of the Key Stage 1 class size funding. So again, that's where we're actually going to stop providing any funds to schools going forward through that route. And again, that was discussed in December when we presented these initial suggestions to the schools forum. And then the final one is that I want to highlight is number 3, the updated text for the SEN contingency. So this is a fund of money that comes from the high needs block, and it's aimed at targeting resources to a minority of schools that have the highest number of children with educational healthcare plans on their roll, and to make sure they get some extra support to manage and integrate those children, and to continue to accept high numbers of EHCP's children onto their roll. So there's a couple of reasons why we need to change it. One is that obviously the profile of the number of children with an education healthcare plan has changed significantly over the last few years. So the thresholds we've had in the past as to you need to have a certain number of pupils with an HCP before you trigger some funding, that needs to be raised now, or that the funding is going to be allocated to too many schools. It does need to be targeted to a minority of schools. So reflecting on the demographics now, we're suggesting a 4%, has to have at least 4% of pupils with an HCP, and that fits the current profile. So it's something obviously we'll need to keep looking at going forward. And just to make a clarification, unfortunately, the paragraph 6.24, which gives an outline of this policy, it does actually have an error in it. It says the funding threshold should be 3.5% for secondary schools, when in fact we're asking for 4%, and that's what's clarified in the annex. So we are actually asking, just to be clear, it's the wording in the annex that we're asking to be agreed here. There's an error in that paragraph 6.24. So we need to make sure the money identifies the right schools, so that the policy identifies the right schools to allocate the funding. And then the second thing that we're looking to do is, because the numbers are increasing a lot, we are looking at ending up allocating more and more money each year through this budget. We want to move to a position where we don't exceed the budget level. So we are proposing that once the data is run through the calculations, we cap the actual allocation to schools to no more than the budget allocation, and that's £114,000 at the moment. So that Annex 5 sets out the proposed text, and it's also got an illustration of how that would actually distribute those funds. So this is page 62, how that money would be distributed in 24-25. So the yellow shaded columns is the actual 23-24 actual. The purple one is just applying the same criteria in 23-24 to 24-25, and you can see that allocates £337,000. And what we're saying is we really need to limit any allocation to our budget of £104,000. And then the two blue blocks of columns on the far right set out what the allocations would be on the model proposed with a fifth in the paper, which is the first column in blue, and then that gets scaled down to the budget, which is in the third column in blue. We've also put in there for illustration if we limited the number of qualifying schools to 25% of numbers rather than 15%. So that would allocate out to more schools. So it's allocating the same amount of money. It's just where do we cut the threshold for how many schools qualify, bearing in mind that the DfE requires us to be targeted to a minority of schools. So that's where the more detailed changes are in the paper. But I think that's all I'd like to highlight. So if there's any, I think there might be some questions.
Go on,
Stuart,
Grant. Oh, sorry.
My question. I've just wondered if there are two members trying to get in and I can't see the lobby. I don't know who has control of that. Sorry. That was my only question. Sorry, Grant. I know you put your hand up first, but
Hannah, I can't see anybody in a lobby. Are you able to?
Hey,
Gareth Croxon and Jenny Baker.
I weirdly can't see them either.
I'll get on the old WhatsApp and tell them to try something different.
Thanks, Tim. Sorry, Grant.
That's okay. So thank you for this work on this, Paul. So I think I broadly, I think all this makes a huge amount of sense, and I think very sensible. I just had a couple of a sort of question and I guess a more general point. So just looking at 6.24 and the allocation around percentages of the HCP. So first of all, I applaud anything that encourages schools to say, yes, I can meet the needs of a child with an EHCP, rather than saying no. And I think that this idea that actually schools having reaching a particular threshold and there's additional support put in place over and above HMB top up as an incentive is a really, really good step in the right direction. So I'm really in support of that. My one question is does that percentage include children who are already in an SRP? So I just want to be double check that if you are a school with an SRP, you are not advantaged over a mainstream school that doesn't have an SRP, because you're likely to have a higher percentage almost structurally. So I just want to be sure that we're not disadvantaging those of us that don't have an SRP. But that, you know, that's just a question for my thing. So I wanted to say that was really good. I also think the proposals in terms of the moving away from the 25 pupils and we're going to give you a bunch of money is broadly the right direction. But I just wanted to make a broad point. Earlier on in this meeting, we talked about funding following the child. And when it comes to in-year transfers in between censuses, that almost never happens. And there are groups of children that regularly we get no money for. So if you have a child that joins your school in November in year 6, you never receive any core funding for that child. You know, we've had children that's joined our school, you know, significant numbers during the year. And that does put financial pressure on the school, even if you've already paid for the teacher and you're not actually opening a new class. that does actually dilute your TA support. You are having to find other resources here and there. And I do wonder, and I know this is a national thing, but I just want to make the point that we talked about the principle of money following the pupil. It doesn't happen when it goes to in-year transfers. And the proportion of in-year transfers that include special educational needs and social care as factors in their decision to move in year, particularly if it's Bracknell Forest to Bracknell Forest, is significant and high. And I've done quite a lot of work over the last 3-year period looking at the in-year transfers for Crown Wood, for example. And around about 40%, 45% of our in-year transfers are other Bracknell schools, and every single one of them had an SEN need, not an EHCP, but an SEN need, or had social care, or there was a medical problem, and they were complaining that other schools weren't managing them and they were going to move. That does put financial pressure on the receiving school. And so the one thing I would say about that growth fund thing is that it did used to give a little bit of respite to schools that were seeing a lot of in-year transfers, feeling there was a bit of a, a bit of money coming in. Because if you time it wrong, you don't get money in from core funding for 2 years. And I think that's just something to be aware of. I am broadly in favour of all this, and I think it's generally sensible. But if we're going to have a principle of money following the children, that needs to be true of all children, not just those that are out for medical or tuition and what have you. It needs to be for all children. And I think we just need to be aware of that. But otherwise, really commend this, really support it, but just with those two slight quibbles, slight concerns about the real mechanics of it and the direction of travel. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for those. Well, I'll do the simple one first. The SRP pupil numbers aren't included in the SEN contingency because you're exactly right. That would skew the support to those schools, and there's a different mechanism to support for those children anyway. So they're specifically excluded from the numbers. In terms of the growth fund and the movement of funds to follow the pupil, this is where I just have to say, I have to quote back to your DfE funding rules. Okay, so the DfE do not allow movement of funds to follow pupils through a normal transfer from one school to another. That's specifically excluded. It's only for the excluded pupils that the rules are that you have to transfer the money. And I wouldn't want to suggest what the reason behind that is, but there's obviously a reason why that money, the DfE want that money transferred, but not any others. What they generally want is budget stability. So once you get your funding allocation, it doesn't change for the bulk of your funding. Your funding does change for your children with SEND support, that SEND needs for an EHCP, but the government funding regulations do not allow us to make funding transfers just for in-year transfers between schools.
Grant?
No, thanks, Paul. And I know you've told me that before, but I feel I keep on having to make the point about it, and I know that's it. But however, what I would say is, and I get that with the previous model, and I think Crown Wood benefited from this 1 year, in that we had a very small year 6 that left, and we had a much bigger reception, and that triggered some extra funding, and I think getting that extra funding for that is, quite rightly, we should manage that sort of money out of the system. Because in the end, I still had 3 classes in year 6. They were just small classes. I got 3 big classes in early years, and that's why I got the extra money. But where I wonder whether we could look in the future is where, if there is schools are getting pure large in-year transfers, not structural year 6 out reception in jumps, unless there is an extra class as you're proposing. But I wonder whether there was a way of looking at, this school has had 25 in-year transfers, of which 50% are from other Bracknell schools, whether there was something around that could be recognised, that does add workload to schools, it does have a cost to schools. It sometimes puts extra work onto my Senko. I sometimes have too few TAs to deal with the additional SEN need that isn't yet an EHCP. I wonder if there is something around that we could look at in the future that recognises that sort of in-year transfer growth as opposed to the structural growth. And I just ask that as something to be considered in the future.
If I could just come back on that, Grant, I don't think we would be permitted to do that, because the whole rationale of the DfE on that why we changed that other growth fund one to a different mechanism is because the DfE want that to just focus on where you need to actually get some extra capacity in your area. So if there's movement between schools, you've got enough capacity to do that. So the money on that is, it's a lagged funding system now, so you'd have to wait a year to get that. But if there's a need that you haven't got any places, you need to open a surge class, or you need to open another class somewhere else, and that misses the census point for funding, then that school should get recognised with some additional funding. So they're very much focused on, if you've got enough places, if people move around, then that just gets picked up in the next census. But if you don't have enough spaces and you need some more classes, then you can put some extra money into school for that reason. So as I say, I've said this loads of times, that the funding regulations are getting quite restrictive, in that there's not a lot of flexibilities and freedoms. There's not a lot of them either, which is helpful, I guess. But that we really can't do those sort of things you're suggesting. Even if they were something we wanted to do, we wouldn't be permitted to do it.
Okay, probably not the answer that Grant wanted, but the truth of the matter, and I think it's also worth noting, and I'm trying not to make a political point, but certainly we've received a large number of contacts about people moving from the private schools into the state system, and a significant number of those are coming with high needs that may not have been a pressure on the high needs block previously. It's just a point to note that there's going to be more than just internal transfers, that there might be some incoming from local private schools. Okay, let's if there's no other points, let's move to page 45, and the first section are for forum to note, and those are the funding allocations to school in accordance with already approved policies. Are we all happy to note that? Thank you. And then 3.2, we are being asked to agree to revised text for policies, and there are 4 areas there, and we're just noting that 3.2, the third point for SEN contingency, it's the annex number that is correct, rather than the number that's in the report, the 4% rather than the 3%.
Chair, may I know Paul answered this question. Can I just confirm, Paul, that that it is clear in the reworded documents that SRPs are not, that it's actually written down in that document that SRPs are not included in the thing? Sorry, I haven't read all the documents in the annexes, but can I just confirm that is the case, that isn't?
That is, yes,
SRPs are not included.
It's this on page 61. It's the second from last yellow highlighted bit. So we didn't have it explicitly in there before, but that's something we picked up going through, so we want to put it in there. It's explicitly mentioned, Grant. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Much appreciated.
Okay.
Okay, so are we all happy to agree to 3.2? Okay, so that is 3.2 agreed. I've just got a couple of other business. Just a reminder that the next meeting is on the 19th of September, and there are some changes going to be proposed to the forum that just require member appointments to end on the 31st of August. So there's alignment with the school year, even when members might join mid-year, the terms will end on the 31st of August. And then finally, to say that my term of office ends on the 31st of August, so I'm stepping down from forum, and they're obviously then chairing. We have been trying to make sure there's some succession planning, and I do believe there will be at least 2 people that will be able to put their names forward, one for chair and one for vice chair, but obviously those positions will be open and open to election in the September meeting. So thank you all. Okay, Liz.
Just want to say thank you for all your hard work, Chair. You've been a real advocate for changing stuff for children, modern stuff. It's been really helpful having somebody take over, and it wasn't the easiest of circumstances. So on behalf of colleagues, actually, well done.
Thank you very much. It's yeah, it's been a privilege to work with you all, and my thanks to you, and my thanks to the officers who do a great job of looking after us. So whoever takes the role in September, it's a very privileged position, and you are very well looked after. So my thanks to everybody as well. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gents. Enjoy the football.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Yes.
Are we losing yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Bye.
Yeah.